Please take your Bibles with me this morning and turn to Psalm 25. Psalm 25. This will be the final message of a brief series that we began a couple of weeks ago, looking at this psalm, and looking at it under a series titled Learning to Wait. And of course, we picked that up from David's number of mentions here. 3 times he mentions waiting for the Lord. We've been looking at different aspects of that and considering different truths here. And speaking of this waiting, David sets us in the seat of a student. We saw this. He does that by talking a lot about being taught. He says to the Lord to teach him and to guide him, to lead him. And then, of course, he also picks up with this alphabetic acrostic from the Hebrew language. And so we took that in the context here, and we said that he's emphasizing this idea of waiting for the Lord. And there's this learning context, this student seat that we're sitting in. And so we're learning to wait. And that is truly something that all of us find ourselves doing at times. It seems the Holy Spirit, through the pen of David, has put his divine finger on the human pulse. Just as human as it is to err, so it is human to wait. As children of God, it becomes our lifelong labor to learn to wait well for the Lord. And so we've been giving attention to that. In our last message, we saw from this psalm who must wait for the Lord by noticing some characteristics here. And I'll just kind of run through these again. We saw that the one who waits for the Lord is going to be one who, at times, is troubled by enemies. And we see in this psalm one who is tossed by their own ignorance, unsure where to go. I don't know which way to take. You lead me, Lord. We saw this to be one who is tormented by sin. At times that sin rising up and giving us such feelings of guilt. And we need to know what to do with that. We'll look at that more today. One torn by affliction. We saw that in verses 16 through 18 especially. This is one who will have to find themselves waiting for the Lord. When troubles and sufferings and distresses and all those words used in those verses just pile up, I really find myself waiting for him. And then ultimately we said this, that the one who must wait for the Lord is the one who trusts in the Lord. This really is the key piece. We said others will go through all those other experiences in life, the ignorance and the struggles with sin and the guilt and all those things. They'll be the circumstances of every human life, but it's uniquely the saint who says, I trust in the Lord. And if that's the case, then we will find ourselves frequently and often waiting for the Lord. Maybe we could say it simply, the one who must learn to wait for the Lord is anyone desiring the Lord to work. Anyone desiring the Lord to work. In any one of those circumstances. This morning, we want to ask and let this psalm answer another question. And that question I'll word this way. What do we do while we wait? What do we do while we wait? The message I've titled, While I Wait for the Lord. What do we do while we wait? Is this waiting for the Lord merely passive, where we may use a couple of common phrases that are thrown around? They're not very good and accurate phrases. I'm using them to make that point. Hopefully that will be clear. Is this waiting for the Lord merely passive, where we let go and let God? Or is this waiting some sort of meeting God halfway activity where we seek to do our obligatory 50% while God does his obligatory 50%? As we look at this psalm this morning, we'll see this waiting is indeed active. It's not passive. Waiting for the Lord is work. We're going to see that. We'll see both of these philosophies, the let go and let God, as well as the meet God halfway. They both fail to accurately capture Scripture's direction to us. They may be catchy phrases, but that does not make them correct phrases. So this morning, I want to hear a message from Psalm 25, this passage with a title that I've put here, While I Wait for the Lord. And I've specifically worded this personal because I want this, I hope, my trust and prayer is that this message and this psalm becomes personal for each one of us. We've talked a lot about we and us as we wait together, and that's all true, but I want to bring this and leave this today, hopefully with each of us, we're walking out and going, while I wait for the Lord. This is you, Christian. This is me. So while I wait for the Lord. And the message this morning comes to us with 9 points. I'm not going to hide that. It's unashamed here. 9 points. It's not regular, I realize. And I thought, and I worked hard this week, I thought, I'm gonna bring this down and consolidate this into, the classic 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. And I tried and tried and tried, and I finally said, you know what? No. We're going to go with 9. And for 2 reasons. 2 reasons. One, the longer list, I think, emphasizes to us the amount of activity that can be done while we wait. Let me explain for a second. When we wait for the Lord, our hearts will often come to us, deceptive as they are, with this kind of rising comment, rising thought that says, what in the world can I do? There's nothing to do. What am I supposed to do while I sit here and wait? It comes to us with a lie. And what I hope, if nothing else, that a list like this will literally overwhelm that lie from within, swamping it and sinking it as the thieving pirate vessel it is with a tidal wave of truth. I hope that 9 points just absolutely overwhelms that lie. And you walk out of here going, there is so much I need to be doing. Never should I sit down as a Christian and go, well, guess I got to wait for the Lord. I'm going to give you 9 things that you can do. Not that are my idea, they're scriptures. So that's one. Second, the longer list, I think, allows for even the whole purpose of this psalm, which is meditative repetition. One of the reasons I was trying to consolidate this was because some of these overlap, and there's some very similar concepts and ideas being brought. We're going to see that one of the main overall emphases throughout this psalm is prayer. And that's going to come up again and again and again. And I thought, well, we can just consolidate that down to just prayer, just 1 point prayer. But the whole point of a psalm is that it works and it turns over and it turns over and it keeps on pushing and then it pulls back and then it pushes again. And we've seen this with psalms in the past, but the whole point is to meditatively repeat to ourselves truth we need to hear. And so I'm just going to let the 9 do that. I think they do that well. If we ask the question as we go along, haven't we seen this point already? The answer will inevitably be yes. But if I could put it this way, when have you ever not needed frequent reminders of the same truths when you've been waiting for a long time? Right? Even in just common, everyday, ordinary waiting in life, we find ourselves often needing reminders of just things we know. And so I think that this will be helpful in that way. We'll let the psalm help us start practicing that. So, that being said, we're going to take these in sequential order, just work down through the psalm. And again, there's some overlap in the verses that I'll be referencing, but a couple of them will skip out of order a little bit, but for the most part, we'll work down through the psalm in order and cover these in sequence. And so our first waiting activity, let's look at in verses 1 and 2. I'll read these verses, and then we'll look at the point. Lord, David writes, I appeal to you. My God, I trust in you. Do not let me be disgraced. Do not let my enemies gloat over me. So here's the first activity. While I wait, and I'm going to start all of these this way. While I wait, I profess my trust in God through prayer. While I wait, I profess my trust in God through prayer. Now, let's give some thought to that. David begins his psalm here with a direct address to God. As we considered recently in one of our Wednesday evening devotionals, prayer is communication with God. It's not primarily petition to God. It's not even just simply praise to God. Prayer is broadly communication with God, full of all sorts of communications, praise and petition and confession, and we talked through some of those on a Wednesday recently. God speaks to us through His Word, and we speak to God through prayer, much as the psalmist demonstrates here. I've mentioned this also a couple of Wednesdays ago, but the early church father Clement of Alexandria, he called prayer conversing with God. Another individual from the past, Isaac Watts, 18th century father of English hymnody, he called prayer the holy skill of conversation with God. A holy skill. Something we acquire and practice and get better at. This act of conversing with an invisible God becomes perhaps one of the greatest demonstrations of a believer's trust in God. You say, I trust in God. And then those moments of waiting come. Right? And those who've heard you say, you trust in God, if I could put it this way, eyes are on you now. Do you really? How are you going to evidence that? How are you going to give profession, proof to your trust in God? Well, prayer is one of those ways. I profess my trust in God through prayer. When we converse with Him about our lives, we wait for His work, we profess that dependence all the more. Notice three characteristics of David's prayer here that are instructive, I think, for our own verbal expression of prayer to God. First of all, there's a relational aspect to this, relational prayer. Before addressing God with one of the most general divine titles, Elohim, all right, that's in verse 2, God, David addresses God by His personal covenant name, Yahweh. Most of our Bibles is probably written Lord in all caps. Jehovah might be another one that you've heard. But Yahweh. And he addresses Him in that personal way. While David speaks to Him who is his superior in all respects, He's God. The psalmist can also speak to Him as familiar friend. This is confident trust professed. Relational communication that recognizes both the transcendent supremacy and the imminent support of the one on whom we wait. I trust in you, Lord. You are both supreme over all, and you are also personally interested in me. It's a relational prayer. Secondly, I would say this, it's a robust prayer. By robust, I don't mean long. I don't mean that it goes on and on and on and on and on. Robust doesn't have to be long. Okay? The contrary, in a few brief words, David expresses deep theology in these opening lines. Let me give you really two categories that we see here. First, David's language reflects an accurate understanding of God's character. He knows who his God is. He's a personal, covenant-keeping God, Yahweh. He's the supreme God of the universe, Elohim. He's the one to whom appeals are made about this life and in whom trust is placed while in this life. Right? We'll see David continue to accurately express God's character throughout this psalm, but initially what he's doing is he's laying out this robust recognition of who God is. This is who you are. And then secondly, David's language also reflects an accurate understanding of his own cares. He understands what's going on in his own heart. And so he speaks, I need to appeal to the Lord. I appeal to you. This is what I need to do. This is what I need to do. I need to trust in you, God. He recognizes a need to not be disgraced by throwing every care on God. God, I'm bringing you the cares of my life, and I'm literally offloading them onto you. And please don't drop them. Please don't fail me on this. And David demonstrates an accurate understanding of his cares even more as we keep reading. This is a brief but robust prayer. Our prayers need not be long to profess our trust in God. We most need to express accurately His character and our cares. Express accurately His character and our cares. Well, third, so you have relational prayer, you have robust prayer, and third, you have repetitive prayer. If you look down at verse 20, you'll see that David repeats part of his opening prayer. He repeats that line, "Do not let me be disgraced, for I take refuge in you." Repetition. Or consider this, that 15 of the 22 verses in this psalm are directly addressed to the Lord. Or we could say it this way, 2/3 of this psalm could be technically termed prayer. The other verses are maybe more of a testimony. He seems to be almost like talking now to those around him, kind of encouraging those around him perhaps. But for 2/3 of this psalm, he's talking to the Lord. What's my point? My point is this. Are you prepared for this in your own waiting for the Lord? Prepared to profess your trust in Him through not just one prayer, not even just two, but multiple prayers. Days, weeks, even years of prayers. I think many of God's people, they go, okay, days, I can do that. Weeks, yeah, all right. Months, all right, it's going to be hard. You get into the years. Folks, that's where the prayers often languish and just tend to kind of fade away and fall off. I mean, I've prayed for that for 5 years now. I mean, really, does heaven hear? Can I keep trusting God with that? Right, these are the questions that perhaps we never say aloud, but sometimes prayers that say the same things about the same things. Repetitive praying. That's what David demonstrates here. I will pray the same thing about the same thing. Do not let me be disgraced, Lord. And I will keep on praying and keep on praying. And you can turn psalm after psalm after psalm and find him repeating some of the same things that we see here throughout this psalm. Repetitive prayer. Are you prepared for that? As you wait for the Lord, your statement, your profession of trust in Him will look in part like this. Prayers that repeat themselves again and again and again to the point that others might say, "Why don't you stop?" And you say, "Because I trust in Him and I wait for Him." So the first activity while we wait for the Lord is professing our trust in Him through relational, robust, and repetitive prayer. Are you prepared for that, Christian? Well, secondly, next activity we see in verses 2 and 3. Kind of dip back into verse 2 and move forward into 3. Here we go. My God, I trust in you. Do not let me be disgraced. Do not let my enemies gloat over me. No one who waits for you will be disgraced. Those who act treacherously without cause will be disgraced. Secondly, while I wait, I clarify reality for others who wait. With these words, David speaks to the Lord, but I can't help but find his words serving others who perhaps also wait on the Lord. And they serve others by clarifying reality. Let me give an illustration that perhaps helps, and then we'll move back into this idea. Illustration not necessarily from a spiritual realm. Growing up, I've mentioned this before, but growing up, my dad and I would hunt together, and I grew up going with him very regularly and sit with him, and then it came time for me to hunt myself, and the two of us wouldn't sit together necessarily, and we would sit different parts of the woods, and this is before cell phones. All right, so at least we didn't have cell phones. So we're in the woods, and but we want to stay in touch, check in, how are things going. And so we had handheld radios, right? But handheld radios are battery powered. You don't leave them on the whole time. And so we would just set a time, okay, on the hour or on the half hour, we'll check in, we'll call, turn your radio on, we'll check in, see how things are going. I didn't really care to sit with myself a whole lot. That got me a little bit angsty. So I'd sit there, and I would sit and wait, and we'd have our first check-in, let's say, and I would sit there after the radio had gone silent, and I'd wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait, and I was convinced we're like almost to the next check-in time. I mean, I'm just so concentrated in this, I'm probably missing things going past me in the woods. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, now this is the time. I pull my watch out, 5 minutes have passed. And man, finally the time rolls around to check in, pull the radio out, I'm early, just in case, turn it on, sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden, your mind does weird things. I remember sitting there and thinking, maybe my dad dropped his radio and doesn't have it anymore. What if he fell out of the tree and he can't call me? Can I get out of the woods okay? Could I find him? And my mind starts just spinning everywhere. Maybe, did I miss him? And then all of a sudden, reality clarified as his voice crackles over the airwaves. Folks, my point with that illustration is this. In the spiritual realm, as we wait for the Lord, here's what our hearts that are so deceptive love to do. They begin in the silence to raise all sorts of possibilities. Well, maybe he doesn't really care right now. Maybe he's not actually heard. Maybe there's something wrong with you, and there's something egregiously sinful that you've not dealt with. Maybe, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on, and then finally, a voice like this breaks through with clarifying reality with words like this. Ah, the one who waits for you will not be ashamed. It's so easy to disorient ourselves. We begin to think maybe we asked too much of God this time. Or maybe, as hard as it is to believe, He's not coming through on this one. Or perhaps this is one that really begins to work in our hearts. We look around at everyone else and others who are making progress in life in similar situations and difficulties and troubles and situations of life, and we look at them and we go, but they're dealing with it in ways that are they're questionable at best, and even maybe sinful at worst. I can't go that way, but how come they get to get it all taken care of and they're doing it the wrong way? And then, again, like a comforting voice, comes the voice of a fellow saint clarifying reality for us. God is the object of the saint's trust. He will not let you be disgraced for trusting in Him. Those who act treacherously without cause will be the ones ultimately disgraced. I need that. And you will need that as you wait for the Lord. You will need reality clarified again and again and again. So, the second thing that we do, we clarify reality for others around us who wait. Look, as the Lord brings you through times of waiting, get good at speaking of the good lessons He teaches you, the truths you come back to rest on, and be quick to share those and speak those out loud. Others need to hear them. You say, but I think they know them. We need the reminder. I know to trust in God, but I need the psalmist at times to say in my ear, God, I trust in you. That's right. That's where I trust. Our next activity, verses 4 and 5. David writes, "Make your ways known to me, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. I wait for you all day long." The third one here, while I wait, I humbly learn all I can from God. We noted this educational theme in the very first week we began looking at this psalm. And David here expresses his desire to know the Lord's ways, to be taught, follow his paths. He bases his desires on the fact that God is the one who rescued him, who delivered him. So the logic would go something like this. God delivered David, so now David wants to know, what next, Lord? You saved me. You're my salvation. What next? Well, that seems like good logic. This is the kind of humility David speaks of down in verse 9 when he says the Lord leads the humble in what's right and teaches them his way. An attitude of humility that says to God, you saved me, I owe everything to you, so you tell me what's next. I want to walk in the well-ordered paths of my deliverer.